Her father told him, "Take the beautiful one," yet the Alpha King picked the rejected sister. The snow fell quietly over the northern kingdom of Arendor, drifting like silver dust across the jagged stone towers of the royal palace. Inside the grand hall, firelight danced across the high ceilings, casting shadows that moved as though alive. Today was the day Prince Kale, the Alpha King of the Northern Lands, would arrive to select a bride, a tradition that had been upheld for generations. The kingdom whispered with excitement, and courtiers brushed past one another with careful bows, each eager to witness the choice that would shape the future of Arendor. Lady Selene, the eldest daughter of the ruling house, stood poised by the balcony, her reflection framed in the icy glass. She had been told her beauty alone would secure Kale's gaze. Her skin was flawless, her hair like molten gold, and her eyes held the kind of pride that came from always being the first in everything. Today she would finally be crowned in the eyes of the kingdom, chosen by the most powerful man in all the lands. She allowed herself a smile, confident that fate had placed her exactly where she belonged. In the shadows near the back of the hall, her younger sister, Lady Elara, watched quietly. Elara's features were delicate, but her beauty had always been considered uneven by the standards of the court. A scar, faint but noticeable, ran along her wrist, a mark of a childhood accident that had left her more cautious, more reserved than Selena. Elara often felt like a shadow in her own home, moving unnoticed between whispers and stolen glances. Today, however, she would step forward whether she wished to or not. The great doors of the hall opened with a slow, resonant creak. Silence fell over the assembly as Kale entered. He was a striking figure, taller than most men, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, and eyes like storm clouds that could hold both danger and tenderness. He carried himself with the weight of authority, yet there was a quiet curiosity in the way he scanned the hall, as if searching for something beyond appearances. "Welcome, Your Majesty," the king's advisor intoned, bowing low. "The daughters of House Vale await your choice." His gaze swept over the sisters. Selene straightened, her smile ready and practiced. Elara, standing slightly apart, felt the warmth of firelight brush across her pale cheeks. She tried to shrink into herself, wishing to be invisible, yet something in Kale's stare held her in place. It was as if he could see her, not as others did, not as a shadow, not as a mistake, but as someone who carried a secret fire within. Selene stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "Prince Kale, I am honored by your arrival. I hope my family's guidance has prepared me for your judgment." Kale nodded, his attention fixed on Elara instead. Selene faltered, a flicker of unease crossing her perfect expression. She had expected admiration, not this. The hall seemed to shrink around her as Kale moved slowly toward Elara, his presence both commanding and gentle, like a storm bending to the earth. "Who is this?" Selene whispered to herself, though the words carried across the quiet hall. "My younger sister," Elara murmured, her voice barely audible. She had hoped it would be enough to remain unnoticed. Kael smiled faintly, but it was not a smile of mockery. It was one of recognition, of seeing something hidden. "Elara," he said, pronouncing her name with a weight that made her knees feel unsteady. "You shall be my choice." A gasp rippled through the hall. Selene's lips parted in shock. The courtiers murmured, some of them scandalized, some intrigued. Her father, a stern man of power and pride, frowned deeply, his eyes narrowing at the unexpected announcement. You cannot be serious? Celine said, her voice trembling with disbelief. I am the eldest, the most beautiful. Surely you mean to choose me. Cale's eyes held hers unyielding. Beauty is not all that matters, he said softly. Yet, with the force of a command, there is strength, there is spirit, and there is the fire within. Elara has what you do not. Celine's face burned, not from shame, but from anger. She had always believed her beauty could shape the world, could command allegiance and love. Now, that belief had been shattered in a single, calm statement. Elara felt herself trembling. Her heart pounded with fear and disbelief. She had never imagined this moment, never dreamed that Cale would see her, not Celine. And yet, beneath the fear, a small spark of something new flickered. Hope. Or perhaps destiny. The court erupted into whispers. Celine's father stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Prince Cale, surely you jest. You have been told to take the beautiful one. Are you blind to propriety? To honor? Propriety is a shell, he replied. It protects what is weak. True strength, true choice lies beneath. And I choose Elara. The hall fell silent again. Even the fire seemed to still in the hearth, as if the walls themselves awaited what would come next. Celine's mouth opened, then closed, her hands clenched at her sides. Elara felt a shiver pass through her, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She was no longer merely a shadow in her sister's light. She was the one chosen, and the weight of that choice pressed upon her chest. Later, as the evening deepened and the hall emptied, Elara wandered to the balcony. Snowflakes drifted around her, cold against her skin, and the wind carried the scent of the northern forests. She felt Cale's presence behind her before she saw him. You are frightened, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Yes, she admitted. I do not know how to be worthy. Cale came closer, standing a few steps behind. Worthy is not given. It is chosen every day in every action. You have the choice now to be brave or to hide forever. Elara looked down at the snow, swirling like silver dust around the balcony. I am afraid I will fail. You will not fail, he said, his voice steady. Not if you listen to yourself. That night, Elara could not sleep. Shadows stretched across the walls of her chamber, thick and whispering. She thought of Celine's anger, of her father's disappointment, and of Cale's strange, piercing gaze. And then she heard it, a soft murmur that seemed to drift from the shadows themselves. The voice was not human, nor entirely ghostly. It was something old, something patient, something that seemed to know her deepest fears. And yet it spoke with curiosity, as if awaiting her answer. Who? Who are you? She whispered, her voice trembling. I am the shadow that watches over those who are chosen, the voice replied. I am the path you have yet to walk, and I am the danger you must face to become what you are meant to be. Elara shivered. Fear pressed against her chest like ice, but beneath it stirred a strange, urgent curiosity. She had always felt unseen, unheard, a shadow among shadows. Yet now the shadow spoke to her directly, acknowledging her, calling her forward. The next morning, the court buzzed with gossip. Kale had made his choice, and it had unsettled the kingdom more than anyone had imagined. Celine moved through the halls with a forced smile, her jealousy barely concealed. Elara, meanwhile, felt the first taste of responsibility, of destiny. She had been chosen, not for beauty, not for compliance, but for a fire within herself that even she had only begun to understand. Kale invited her to walk with him through the palace gardens, where ice-covered fountains gleamed in the pale sunlight. "Do you understand what you have stepped into?" he asked, his voice even, but carrying a weight that made her pause. I I do not know," she admitted. "Then you must learn quickly," he said. "The crown is not a gift. It is a test, and the test has already begun." As they walked, a gust of wind stirred the snow from the trees, and Elara saw for a fleeting moment a shadow moving between the branches. Watching, waiting, a chill ran down her spine. She realized that Kale's selection had not only disturbed the court, but had awakened forces far older than any tradition, forces that would not rest until the choice had been tested in fire and darkness. That night, as she lay in her chamber, Elara heard the whisper again. "You are chosen." But at what cost? Her eyes filled with determination and fear. She did not yet know the answer. But she understood that her life, and perhaps the life of the kingdom, would never be the same. And somewhere in the halls of the palace, Prince Kale watched the moon rise above the frozen mountains. His mind lingered on the quiet strength he had seen in Aura, a strength he knew would be tested by shadows, by power, and by love. The snow fell silently, but beneath it, the storm was already gathering. The morning sun barely pierced the thick clouds over Arindor, casting the palace in gray light that made the stones gleam like cold metal. Elara walked beside Kale through the vast corridors of his fortress, her steps echoing against the walls. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the crown, the weight of her father's expectations, and the weight of Coel's piercing gaze pressing on her at once. Kale moved with confidence, every gesture measured and precise. Even in silence, he commanded attention. The Alpha King was not merely a ruler. He was a force, unyielding, a man who had faced betrayal, battle, and the harsh cold of a northern throne. Yet now, walking beside him, Elara felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. Every glance he gave her seemed to see through her, beyond the scar, beyond the timid girl she had once been. "Do you understand why I chose you?" Kale asked suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet rhythm of their steps. Elara shook her head. I do not. I am not the one your father expected. Celine she is beautiful, strong in ways I cannot be." Kale's eyes softened for a fraction of a second and then hardened again. "Strength is not always obvious," he said. "Sometimes it is quiet, hidden. Something only the storm can reveal. You have that storm, Alara. I felt it the moment I saw you. Her stomach tightened, a mix of pride and terror. She wanted to retreat into the shadows as she always had. Yet something in his voice, in the way he regarded her, made her legs feel as though they could carry her anywhere, even to a throne she had never imagined she could touch. The palace gardens stretched before them, frozen fountains glinting like crystal, snow-laden branches creaking in the wind. Alara paused, gazing at the silent statues of long-dead kings and queens, their faces solemn and unyielding. She wondered how many of them had felt the pressure of expectation, the fear of failing, not just themselves, but everyone who depended on them. You will be tested, Kale said, breaking her thoughts. Not by me, but by the forces around you. By those who envy you, by those who would see you fall, and by the darkness that stirs when a choice like ours is made. Darkness? Kale's gaze shifted to the distant mountains, where storm clouds gathered like rolling shadows. The curse I warned you of, it is not gone. It sleeps for now, but it watches, waiting. And it knows you have been chosen. That knowledge alone is enough to wake it. The words made her heart pound. She had only glimpsed the shadow in her room that night, felt the whisper of danger and power, and now she understood. It was not imagination. It was real. It was coming. Before she could speak, a commotion erupted near the hall. Courtiers and servants rushed past, whispering in urgent, fearful tones. Alara and Kale quickened their pace, moving toward the source. There, in the center of the courtyard, Selene stood with her hands raised in mock innocence, her eyes glinting with something sharp and cold. Around her, several guards looked uncertain, unsure whose side they should take. I cannot allow this, Selene said, her voice strong and clear. Kale has made a mistake. He chose the shadow over the light, the weak over the strong. And I will not stand by while it continues. Alara felt a tremor in her chest. She had feared her sister's jealousy, but seeing it manifest in such open hostility was almost more than she could bear. Selene had always been confident, commanding attention without effort. Now, that confidence was weaponized, sharp, and dangerous. Kale stepped forward, his presence immense and unyielding. Selene, he said, his voice calm but firm, you will not interfere. Alara is my choice, and no one, not even you, will change that. You think you can control her? Control me? This court is not yours alone to command. Kael's dark eyes narrowed. Perhaps not, but I will not allow her to be harmed. At that moment, the air shifted. A cold wind swept through the courtyard, carrying whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, voices too faint to understand, but too insistent to ignore. Alara's breath caught. The shadow had awakened. She could feel it curling around her ankles like smoke, reaching for her heart. Kale noticed her hesitation and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Do not fear it, he said. Fear gives it power. You must face it with your own will, not your terror. Alara nodded, trying to steady herself. She had always hidden from fear, from the things she could not control. Now, the shadow was not something she could hide from. It was part of her destiny, part of the choice that had been made for her, and yet part of her that had always been waiting to awaken. The first test came soon after. A shadow beast, born of the old curse, emerged from the frozen forest that bordered the palace grounds. Its eyes glowed like coals, its body shifting and indistinct, like smoke and shadow merged into something alive. Guards raised their weapons, but they faltered under its gaze, paralyzed by fear. Kale moved instantly, drawing his sword and cutting a path toward Alara. "Run to me," he commanded, his voice like steel wrapped in warmth. Alara hesitated, then found herself moving, as if guided by some unseen force. When she reached Kale, their hands brushed, and a shock ran through her. Not of pain, but of connection, of power she did not yet understand. Together they faced the shadow beast. Kale fought with skill, but it was Alara's sudden instinct, her quiet strength, that pushed the beast back. She lifted her hands, unsure what she did, yet a pulse of energy shot from her fingertips, forcing the creature to retreat into the darkness. The courtyard fell silent. The guards stared at her, amazed. Even Kale seemed surprised, though he quickly masked it with a shadow of his usual control. "You have power," he said softly, his hand still resting on hers. "More than you realize. And the curse knows it." Alara felt both fear and awe. She had always believed herself weak, insignificant. Now she understood that she had been waiting for this moment, that the spark inside her was real, and it had finally ignited. Later, in the safety of Kale's private chambers, Alara sat by the fire, trying to calm her racing heart. Kale poured 2 cups of steaming tea and handed one to her. The warmth seeped into her fingers, grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone. "You are afraid," Kale said, sitting opposite her. "And that is good. Fear keeps you alive, but you cannot let it rule you. You must learn to trust yourself and me." Alara looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. "I do not know how," she whispered. "Then you will learn," he said, his voice firm but kind, "step by step. The curse will test you. The court will test you. Even your sister will test you. But if you falter, I will be here, not to fight for you, but to help you stand." For the first time, Alara realized that Kale's choice was more than preference. It was a challenge, a test of character and courage. He had not chosen her because she was beautiful, or because she could please the court. He had chosen her because he saw something in her, strength, resilience, and a spark of the storm that could change the kingdom. Days passed, and the tension in the palace grew. Celine continued her subtle attacks, spreading rumors and seeking allies. Yet, each time, Alara found herself rising to the challenge, guided by Kale's presence and her own awakening power. She practiced controlling the shadows that whispered to her, learning to bend the energy to her will. Each success strengthened her confidence, though the danger always lingered, like a storm on the horizon. One night, as Alara wandered the frozen palace gardens, she felt the shadow stirring again. It coiled around her, whispering promises of power, of secrets yet untold, of danger and destiny intertwined. She knew she could not ignore it. "Show yourself," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chill that crawled up her spine. The shadows parted slightly, revealing a flicker of light, not harsh, not threatening, but guiding. It was the shadow she had first heard the night Kale chose her, and it now seemed almost alive, moving with intent. "You will be tested," it whispered again. "Not once, but many times. And not all tests will be fair." Elara nodded, a shiver running through her, not from fear, but from anticipation. She understood now that her journey had only begun, and that the choices she made would shape not only her life, but the fate of Arendor. Kale appeared silently behind her, his presence like a warm shield against the cold. "Are you ready?" he asked. Alara turned to him, her eyes meeting his storm-dark gaze. "I think I am beginning to be," she said. He gave her a faint smile, one that held both pride and warning. "Then the storm will come, and you must face it, not with fear, but with fire." And as the first flakes of a new snowstorm began to fall, swirling around them in silver light, Ilara understood that nothing would ever be the same. The Alpha King had chosen her not for what she was, but for what she could become. And the path ahead was filled with danger, desire, and the awakening of a power older than the kingdom itself. The palace of Arendor was no longer the sanctuary it had once seemed. Snowstorms battered the walls from the north, and the wind carried whispers of fear that crept into every hall. The curse, once dormant, had fully awakened, and its presence was felt in every shadow, every flicker of candlelight, every echoing footstep. Elara moved cautiously through the corridors, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. She could feel the shadows crawling at her feet, testing her control, whispering doubts into her mind. Every step she took was deliberate, a reminder that she now bore a power that could save or destroy everything she loved. Kale walked beside her, silent and watchful, his eyes scanning every corner. The Alpha King had been tested in battle countless times, but even he seemed wary of the darkness that now gripped the palace. Seleni's influence had grown as well. She had gathered allies, whispering lies into the ears of those who were afraid of change. She sought not only to reclaim Kale's favor, but to control the kingdom itself, and she was willing to bend every rule, to use every weapon to achieve her goal. Elara knew that the greatest threat might not be the shadows alone, but her sister's ambition. It began one evening, under a blood-red moon that hung low over the palace. Selene confronted Elara in the Hall of Echoes, a long corridor lined with portraits of past rulers. Their eyes seemed to follow the sisters as they moved, as though the walls themselves were witnesses to the confrontation. "You think you are worthy," Selene said, her voice sharp and commanding. "The crown was meant for me, and Kael, he will regret choosing you." Elara's hands trembled, but she lifted them, letting the shadows stir at her command. The whispers grew louder, urging her to act, to strike, to prove her power. Kael stepped forward, placing himself between the sisters. "Selene," he said calmly, though the air around him seemed to hum with tension, "this ends now. You will not harm her, and you will not harm the kingdom." Selene laughed, a sound like glass breaking in the wind. "You cannot stop what is coming. She does not even know her own strength yet. One misstep, and the curse will consume everything." Elara's eyes widened as the shadows around her began to pulse, responding to the fear and anger in the hall. She had practiced controlling them in secret, but this was different. The shadows were alive, responding to the threat in ways she could not predict. A tendril of darkness shot from the floor, swirling around Selene's feet, causing her to stumble back in shock. Kale's hand rested on Alara's shoulder, steadying her. "Control it," he urged. "Do not let fear guide you." Alara drew in a deep breath, focusing on the warmth of Kale's presence. Slowly, she wove the shadows with her will, shaping them into a barrier that surrounded Celine without causing harm. The shadows pulsed and shimmered, a testament to Alara's growing mastery, and Celine froze, realizing for the first time that her sister was no longer defenseless. "You cannot do this," Celine whispered, fear creeping into her tone. "You are not ready." "I am ready," Ilara said firmly, her voice carrying across the hall. "I have no choice but to be." Before Selene could respond, the curse surged. A wave of shadow and fire erupted from the floor, sweeping through the hall like a living storm. Candles exploded in a shower of sparks, and the portraits on the walls seemed to shiver as if recoiling from the power unleashed. Kale shouted, drawing his sword to protect them both. But he did not interfere with the force that Alara had summoned. This was her battle, her control, and her destiny. The shadows roared around them, thick and black, yet luminous with an otherworldly glow. Alara's heart raced, but she remembered Kale's words, control it with her will, not her fear. Slowly, trembling with exertion, she shaped the storm, bending the fire and shadow into a form that enveloped Celine, shielding her rather than harming her. Celine screamed, a mix of frustration and fear, as the storm receded, leaving her trembling on the cold stone floor. Alara stood, breathless, her cloak dusted with ash and frost. Kale lowered his sword, his eyes filled with both pride and concern. "You have done well," he said, his voice low. "But the curse is not finished. It will test you again, and it will not forgive mistakes." Elara nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. She had always feared failure, but now she understood that failure was not an option. Every action, every choice could ripple across the kingdom, touching lives in ways she could not yet imagine. The next days were a blur of preparation and vigilance. Elara trained with Kale, learning not only to control the shadows but to anticipate them, to feel their movements and respond before they could strike. She discovered that the shadows were not merely destructive. They could heal, protect, and reveal hidden truths. Each lesson brought her closer to understanding her own strength, and closer to Kale as well. In the quiet moments between training, Kale would speak to her of his own past, of battles fought and losses endured. He did not speak of love directly, but his words carried a tenderness that Alara could not ignore. She felt a pull toward him, a bond forged in the fires of shared struggle, yet she was wary of its depth. Trust, she had learned, was fragile, and the world they lived in demanded caution. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens under the pale light of a crescent moon, Ella sensed something stirring in the shadows around them. She paused, feeling the familiar hum of energy that now seemed a part of her. "Kael," she whispered, "the shadows. They are stronger tonight." He glanced around, his eyes narrowing. Yes, the curse senses fear and uncertainty. It feeds on it. You must be careful. Elara drew in a deep breath, summoning the power that had grown within her. The shadows coiled around her hands, responding to her will, and she felt a surge of confidence. For the first time, she did not feel afraid. She felt capable? "Show me," Kale said, his voice soft yet commanding. "Show me what you can do." She stepped forward, letting the shadows rise and twist, forming shapes that shimmered with light and darkness intertwined. She felt the energy course through her, and with it, a sense of clarity she had never known. She could see the threads of the curse, the ways it sought to manipulate and destroy, and she began to weave a pattern that could contain it, if only for a moment. Suddenly, a figure moved in the darkness. Celine, her eyes wide with envy and fear. You think you can control it?" she demanded. "You cannot. The curse will destroy everything." Alara did not answer with words. She raised her hands and the shadows responded, forming a barrier that protected the gardens, the palace, and herself. Celine's anger flared, and she lashed out with words sharp as blades, trying to provoke fear, trying to destabilize Alara's control. But Alara stood firm. With every heartbeat, she drew strength from Kale's presence, from the knowledge that she was no longer alone, from the quiet certainty that she could rise above fear. The shadows shimmered, bending to her will, and Celine faltered, realizing that her sister had changed. Kale stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a silent connection that grounded them both. "You are ready," he said. "But the final test is yet to come. The curse will not relent, and the choices you make will shape the fate of everyone here." Elara nodded, feeling both fear and determination. She had faced the first surge of the curse and survived, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The storm was gathering, stronger and more relentless than before, and she would need all her strength, all her courage, and all her trust in Kale to face it. That night, as the palace slept under a sky heavy with clouds, Elara stood alone in her chamber. The shadows whispered once more, curling around her like living silk. They spoke of power, of destiny, and of a future she could not yet see. "Are you ready?" the shadows murmured. Elara closed her eyes, letting the darkness wash over her. She felt the fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, but beneath it all, she felt something stronger. A quiet fire, a determination that could not be broken. "I am ready," she whispered. And far above the frozen kingdom, the moonlight glinted off the icy peaks, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into eternity. The curse was awake, the storm was rising, and Elara was no longer the quiet shadow she had once been. She was the light and darkness intertwined, the storm and the calm, the chosen one who would shape the fate of a kingdom. The snow fell heavier that night, but beneath it the shadows moved with intent, and the palace waited for the next confrontation. A confrontation that would test not only Alara's power, but her heart, her trust, and the bond she shared with the Alpha King. Elara and Kale fell through darkness that seemed endless, the air around them thick with shadows that whispered fears and regrets. And the floor of the palace had given way beneath their feet, and they plummeted into a void that stretched beyond sight. Time felt distorted. Moments stretched into eternity, and every heartbeat echoed like a drum in a cavern of silence. "Elara!" Kale's voice rang out, strong and commanding, cutting through the whispers of fear. He reached for her as they fell, his hand brushing against hers. A spark of warmth flared where their fingers touched, anchoring her in the storm of shadows. "I'm here!" she shouted, though her voice trembled. I'm not leaving you! The abyss pulsed with energy, a living manifestation of the curse. Shadows swirled around them, forming monstrous shapes that tried to pull them apart. Kale's presence was steady, a force against the chaos. But Alara felt her strength tested like never before. She could feel the dark power within her, growing, demanding, threatening to consume everything if she faltered. "Focus!" Kale shouted. "Use what you have learned. Control it. Do not let it control you." She thought of the days she had spent training, of the shadows she had learned to bend and shape, of every moment Kale had stood beside her as both protector and teacher. Slowly, carefully, she reached out, letting the shadows respond to her will rather than her fear. The swirling darkness around them began to bend, forming a tunnel of light and shadow that held them as they fell. They landed with a heavy thud on cold stone, the force of impact reverberating through their bones. They were inside a cavern, vast and silent, the walls shimmering with the reflections of unseen fires. The curse had created this place, a liminal world between the living palace and some deeper, darker reality. Kale helped her to her feet, his hand firm around hers. "We have to move," he said. "The curse will test us further. It will not let us leave easily." As they ventured deeper into the cavern, the shadows shifted, forming visions of the past and possibilities of the future. Elara saw her father, his stern face softening as he looked at her. She saw Selene, standing atop a throne made of ice, reaching for a crown that was never meant to be hers. And she saw herself, alone, her power fully realized, standing against the darkness with Kale at her side. "It's showing us choices," Kale murmured. "The curse tests not only our strength, but our hearts. It wants us to doubt, to falter." Ilara nodded, gripping his hand tightly. "Then we will not falter. We will face it together." The shadows coalesced into a figure, dark and immense, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. It was the spirit of the curse itself, ancient and unyielding, demanding obedience and submission. Its voice was like thunder and silk intertwined. "Why do you resist?" it asked. "All who enter this place fall. Why should you be any different?" Alara stepped forward, her chest tight but her voice steady. "Because we choose our own path, we will not be ruled by fear. We will not be divided by jealousy. We will face you with strength and heart." Kale drew his sword, the blade shimmering with a light that cut through the darkness. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice firm. "We stand together as one." The spirit of the curse surged forward, shadows lashing out like tendrils of black flame. Elara raised her hands, calling upon the energy she had nurtured for months. The shadows around her did not resist. They obeyed, bending and twisting into a protective cocoon around her and Kale. Light and darkness intertwined, a balance that the curse had never expected. "You dare?" the spirit hissed, its form flickering with uncertainty. "We dare," Elara said, feeling her confidence grow. "Because love, courage, and trust are stronger than fear and darkness." The cavern shook as the curse attacked again, but each strike was met with the combined power of Alara's mastery and Kale's strength. Step by step they advanced, their bond growing with every movement, every touch, every shared breath. Shadows that once threatened now flowed in harmony with them, guided by Alara's will and Kale's steadfast courage. Finally, they reached the heart of the cavern, a vast chamber where the air shimmered with a spectral light. The curse took its final form, a colossal figure of fire and shadow, its voice echoing like a storm. "Submit or be consumed," it roared. Elara took Kale's hand, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grip. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection between them, on the love, trust, and determination that had brought her here. Slowly, she lifted her hands, allowing the shadows and light to merge into a single flowing energy. The cavern trembled, the curse's power colliding with hers in waves of energy that painted the walls with fire and darkness. "You cannot control me," the curse hissed, "for I am eternal." "I do not seek to destroy you," Elara said, her voice calm but resolute. "I seek to understand, to balance, to transform. And I choose light and shadow together, not one without the other." The spirit faltered, its tendrils wavering as Alara's power enveloped it. Slowly the darkness began to dissolve, the shadows retreating into shapes that shimmered with silver light. The curse's roar faded into a whisper, and then silence. Kale released a breath he had been holding. "You did it," he said, awe in his voice. "You transformed it. You saved us all." Elara looked around, the cavern now calm, shimmering with light, and shadow intertwined in perfect balance. She felt exhaustion, yes, but also a profound clarity. She had faced the darkness, embraced it, and emerged stronger. They returned to the palace, the snowstorm outside beginning to soften into a gentle snowfall. The people of Arendor watched as the great halls filled with light once more, the shadows no longer threatening but protective, a sign of the balance that had been restored. Selene appeared, her eyes wide with fear and awe. She looked at Elara not with envy, but with the beginning of understanding. I did not know you had it in you," she said quietly. Elara stepped forward, extending a hand. "You do not need to fight me," she said. "We can all find our place without destroying each other." Selene hesitated, then took the hand. The tension between them softened. Those scars would remain. Forgiveness was not immediate, but a seed had been planted. Kale stood beside Elara, their hands entwined, their eyes meeting in a quiet understanding. Words were unnecessary. The bond they shared spoke louder than any declaration. The kingdom had been saved, the curse transformed, and the power that had once threatened now served to protect. In the days that followed, Elara grew into her role as queen, not merely by title but by presence. She moved with confidence, guided by both wisdom and compassion. Kale ruled beside her, not as a master over her, but as a partner, a protector, and a companion in the trials of leadership. The people of Arendor began to heal, inspired by the courage and strength of their new queen. The snow melted into rivers of silver, the shadows receded into protective guardians, and the air seemed lighter, filled with the promise of new beginnings. One evening, Elara stood on the balcony, the sky painted with the colors of sunset. Kale joined her, his hand resting over hers. "You were always meant for this," he said softly. "Not just the crown, but everything. The strength, the courage, the love. You have transformed not only the curse, but the kingdom itself." Elara smiled, feeling the warmth of his presence and the quiet power within her. "We transformed it together," she replied. I could not have done it alone. They stood in silence, watching the first stars appear in the sky. The kingdom lay before them, healed and protected, yet alive with the potential for new challenges and adventures. The storm had passed, but the bond forged in fire and shadow would remain, stronger than any curse or threat. Elara turned to Kale, her eyes bright with determination and love. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we will face it together." Kale's smile was slow, full of warmth and unspoken promises. "Together," he agreed. The moon rose over the kingdom, silver light bathing the palace towers. Shadows no longer lurked with malice. They danced, alive with energy and purpose. The Alpha King and the Queen stood side by side, hearts scarred but unbroken, rulers of a kingdom reborn through courage, love, and the choice to face darkness with light. And in the quiet that followed, the kingdom of Arendor knew peace, fragile, precious, and hard-won, and a love that had been tested in the fire of shadows, yet emerged eternal.